Today we have quite a unique session, quite different from our ordinary winter school programs in the sense that the presenters are very young, much younger than our normal presenters. I have here with me Linda Kushley Patiwi. Linda Kushley is a postgraduate student at the University of Cape Town. And he's a postgraduate student at the University of Cape Town. His research is he's busy with his master's research, and it's based on the study of language and philosophy. He's looking at how we can extract philosophical underpinnings of a society through their language. He's also an activist based in Cape Town and concerned about contemporary Black life in South Africa in a post-apartheid context. He's going to be moderating the session, which is going to be a conversation between two people, one of them well known to us, and the other one not so well known to people in Cape Town. But before I say anything more, let me rather just hand over to Linda Kushley, who will introduce our speakers today. Linda Kushley, over to you.
Thank you, Zuleika. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Zuleika, you have said, today we have an exciting conversation between Moalaudi Wa Sekake and Dr. Lwazi Lushaba. Dr. Lushaba is a lecturer of politics at the University of Cape Town. He is also the principal investigator for the Decolonizing Social Sciences. The Decolonizing Social Sciences is interested in the phenomenology of Black life in South Africa. He is quite well known both here at Cape Town and generally in South Africa. I think, Doc, you probably have joined now that ambiguous term in South Africa called the public intellectual. I don't know if you like that term or not, but it looks like it is there now. Dr. Lushaba will be in conversation with Moalaudi Wa Sekake about his latest book titled Meditations from the Gutter. Moalaudi is from KZN, considers himself a Kuluva intellectual, someone who operates outside the corridors of the ivory towers of the university. I don't know whether we say Moalaudi, we bring the university to the gutter, we take the gutter to the university. But yeah, those are the two people that we have today.
Thank you very much, Comrade Moderator, and thank you very much to the UCT Winter School for according us this opportunity, to have a conversation with, a young, Black South African writer who, has given to us a gift, which we may not at this present moment appreciate, but I'm sure, just like we did not appreciate the writings of people like Mazisi Gunene when they were being written, the future generations will come to appreciate what a gift the book we're going to be talking about is to Black people today. And so I greet you this afternoon. I greet, Moalaudi, and I greet everyone who's present, in the session. So I have a bit of a, an enjoyable but difficult task, of talking about a book that someone who's written the book, is here. So who knows, the book very well, but I'm going to be talking about the book as though, I know much better about the book than, its author. The problem with, the way in which modern knowledge is organized is always the supposition that there has to be an authorial relationship, with the text and then the audience. But taking all of those things, along, I'm going to try and, set the context for the discussion by painting a picture of the book for those who haven't seen it, and I suppose not many of us, have been able to lay our hands on it. So what I'm going to try and do in the next few minutes is try and give you a picture of the book, get a sense of what the book is about. But it's not a summary, an attempt to summarize the book, but an attempt to pick the salient points that render the book unique and therefore justify my claim that the book is a gift to Black people that Moloadi has given to us. And as such, even though we may not be able to thank him sufficiently for it, I'm certain that history will. So the title of the book is Meditations from the Gutter. When you do get the book, a few things are going to, strike you about the book. It is that the book is a combination of short stories, poetry, and academic. In one book, in these two covers, you find all these genres, put together. And of course, the full title of the book is indeed Meditations from the Gutter, Short Stories, Essays, and Poems. It doesn't take long for you to notice that there is something unique about this book. And one of the things that you quickly notice, as I've said, is the fact that it brings together all these genres, under one cover. And of course, you wonder, in a world where publishing has not only integrated itself into the disciplining machinery of the dominant cultural regime in South Africa and in the world generally, how could it possibly have found its way into life where publishers first would ask you, so what kind of a book is this? Is it academic? If it's academic, is it a book of poetry? Is it short stories? Where publishers are very strict about not only what they publish, but they also make sure that they discipline the way in which we transmit our ideas to our audiences. So then how the book made it into the world, how it managed to be born. But of course, it is in the nature of it is in the nature of the academics like, Moloadi, or intellectuals more than academics, who operate outside of the mainstream to give us such unique offerings that we would otherwise not find, in the university. So the book is self-published. That's the answer. If you were looking for the answer to the question, how could this book have made it? The book is self-published. But what is interesting in the fact that the book is self-published, it tells us about what are the possibilities that remain for those intellectuals that want to defy the disciplining architecture of the mainstream. And so I suppose that what the book suggests to us is that perhaps we have to look outside of the mainstream publishing houses in order to be able to get the kind of ideas that make sense, to the lives of Black people. And in a moment you get to a book is self-published. It is for a number of points that I do, want to make that are critical. So the book is a collection, as I've said, of short stories, essays, poems. And so one wonders, once the person starts reading the book, what possibly unites? What is the theme that runs through the book that unites, all of these different, medias, or rather these different genres, short stories, essays, and poems. Now, it doesn't take long for one to notice that a number of things unite, all of these different, offerings in the book. it is that the book is about Black people. So at one level, you can see that the book is about Black people. But as you read deeper, you find that the book is not just about Black people. The book is about the lived experience of Black people. As you read further, you find that the book is basically a phenomenological rendition of Black life. As you read again further, you are taken back to the title of the book, Meditations from the Gutter. Now, I do know that often enough we associate the concept of meditations with Deka. But actually, as it is used here, it is Hassel who takes up, the concept of meditations, from Deka and transposes that act of meditation into phenomenology. And so when, Edmund Hassel writes, the book, Cartesian Meditation, he was also in that same, text inaugurating a field we came to know as phenomenology. And so Hassel, a teacher to Heidegger, who, took further the study of phenomenology. And so one of the things we are going to find in the book is that there are several layers that unite the book. One, it's about Black people. At another level, it's about the lived experience of Black people. At another level, you would see that what runs across is the fact that the book is a phenomenological experience of the Black, people or Black lives. And so you do not then find these three different genres, out of joint with each other. But rather there is a certain synergy that, runs through all of them. Now there is something else that strikes one as one reads the book, and as I make this point, I'm perhaps going to quote my first question, to Moalaudi so that he may, when he makes his, comment, try and attend to this. Now, in a text titled Representation of the Intellectual, Edward Said talks about, how useless the academic in a liberal university is. In fact, he calls them, the professional academics, the 4 to 5, or rather the 8 to 4 academics. And here is what is useless about the professional academics, or the 8 to 4 academics. One, it is their attitude towards knowledge. So you find academics who take up the kind of text that you have written and say, oh, Ralph Ellison, is he a political scientist? If you're a political scientist, they'll say, is he a political scientist? And then if you said, no, he's a writer, I say, oh, that's what they read in literature. So their attitude is not towards knowledge, but rather their attitude, is that something that I'm allowed not to know. Because belonging to a discipline basically has become a license for people not to know. So they have an excuse for saying, oh, Karl Marx, but I'm not in political theory. That's for people, even when they're in political science, they say, but that's for people in political theory. So that is Edward Said's complaint about the professional academic or the 8 to 4 academic. It is that they actually have a very worrying attitude towards knowledge. But the other thing is that the professional academic at times ventures to critique the university, but depends on the very university for validation. So they find everything wrong about this liberal university, but then they turn to the same liberal university in order for it to validate them. And so there is a dangerous academic is now history. You won't find that figure because you have academics in the institutions that, Edward Said spoke of. Now, here is my point about the book. You seem to have a different and exemplary relationship to knowledge because in the book, you speak comfortably about Hegel, Marx, Ralph Ellison, Ben Fine, Bakhtin, and these are people in different fields. So what you find in your book is anthropology in conversation with literary theory, it's political economy in conversation, with radical political thought, there is no discrimination, of the fields. And so I find that the text that you've given to us is very comfortable in different areas, which is emblematic of that now rare, intellectual who's actually interested in knowledge rather than mastering the professional disciplinary, expectations, so that the institution may then validate him or reward him or her for mastering just that narrow part, of knowledge. And so the book, it's about Black life, but the book is also not limited by disciplinary boundaries, because, as I said, the book is about the lived experience of Black life, or the suffering of Black people, if you wish. Now, here is the interesting thing about the suffering of Black people. It is not categorized into disciplinary boundaries. So the people, when people suffer, or when the lived experience of Black people is not categorizable into, are you now suffering sociologically? Are you now suffering economically? Are you now suffering anthropologically? Are you now suffering literally? We live life as Black people all at once. So my point is that the lived reality of Black people is not categorizable into disciplines. And so what is good about this text is that it also does not, succumb to the limitations of, the disciplinary boundaries. It is able to comfortably transverse, several disciplines. And as I said, in the book, you find Marx in conversation with Ralph Ellison, with Ben Fine, and several other people in different fields. And I think that's one admirable, feature of this book, which would have made it difficult, for it to pass, through the mainstream publishing houses, because then they would have asked, is this a book in literature? Is this a book in, cultural studies? Is this a book, anywhere else? The second point that, I do want to raise, which is linked to that, is the fact that, just as you correctly point out, academic language has completely failed to capture Black life in its fullest concretion. Now, it does seem to me that what the book does and what you do together with your co-travelers is basically here create a language for what I call a Black existential analytic. So what you're trying to do is to create a language with which to talk about Black life, a language that will capture the reality of Black life. And so I'm curious if you could enlighten your readers how easy and how difficult has it been, to find that language that appropriately captures the reality of Black life. Now, I do know very well, as someone who teaches in a white liberal institution and who's expected to teach white racist knowledge, how difficult it is within modern disciplinary knowledges to find a vocabulary that will capture, the reality of Black people. Because remember, and as the point you make very well in the book, the problem with being Black is that we've been legislated outside of the category of the human. Now, modern disciplinary sciences are about human beings. And so they don't have a language for those, who lie outside of the category human. The other point I do want to raise is, it is very evident that in the book you have been greatly influenced by phenomenological thought. You do not have to mention, the fact that, Heidegger, is very much, or provides the method which is called the phenomenological method, for engaging in the kind of discourse that you are engaged in. So I do get a sense that the book is an existential analytic of what we call in phenomenology the concrete existence structure of Black life. But there's something more interesting about the book. It is that you do not end at considering just the lived experience of Black life, but you also deal with the temporality of life, and particularly of the dominant power structure. Now, what is the importance of time? I mean, of course, Heidegger in Being and Time, the first part, he did, the existential analytic or the existence, and then the second part of the book, that's where he deals with the temporality of being. And I do see that the influence, technology has also led you into looking at the temporality of life, including that of the dominant power structure. There is something important about time. It is that modern time, in its unilinear, empty homogeneous sense, assumes or has been one of the instruments with which we have been pushed outside of the category of the human, or it's one of the instruments that have been used to create an asymmetry between us and white or the Western, people, in the sense that in that unilinear time, white people are always ahead at the ultimate stage, and we are made, to follow behind, or also attempting to reach that ultimate stage which white people basically represent, or the Western world represents. Now, I'm quite curious, to find out how examination of the temporality of Black life has, or to what extent the examination of the temporality of Black life in South Africa. So I was talking about how, the book is evidently influenced by, a tradition of thought that we identify with phenomenologists like, Edmund Husserl and Heidegger. And, how you deal not just with the existential analytic, of the existence structure of Black people, but also you deal with the temporality, of Black life. And my point there was that time, the Western unilinear conception of time, that very Benjaminian time, the empty homogeneous time, how time has been used in modern thought in order to create an asymmetry between Black people and white people or the Western world, in the sense that white people or the Western world always represents the ultimate stage, to which we are all aspiring, and so I was curious to find out, looked at in the concrete existence structure of Black people in South Africa, what insights do we get when we look at the temporality of Black life in South Africa today, what that method teaches us. The other point I do want to raise is a point about which there is agreement between you and one of your interlocutors, Mbekezeli Mpele. Is there hope for the gutter? Is there hope for those, who subsist, in the gutter? And of course, I think as I make the point, I perhaps should ask you, to enlighten all of us, what is the gutter? In the book, you do spend a lot of time. It's not just a spatial space. I mean, it's not just a geography. It's a created place, of being. So I think that the readers would be quite curious to find out, is there a possibility of meditating from the gutter? And if there is, what is the gutter? Because it supposes, that the gutter, or generally we suppose that very few good things come from the gutter, and so I think that it would help if you were to spend a little of time enlightening us about the gutter. So back to the point I'm making. Is there, For far too long, as Mbegezeli Mpele says, for far too long, we've been talking about the condition of Black people in the gutter. It doesn't seem to change. You know, as Hugh Masekela saying long ago, wherever you find Black people, you know, anywhere in the world, you know, they live in the gutter. Now, what hope is then there for people who subsist there? Well, you do, together with Mbe, seem to agree that, well, there's something that refuses to die amongst those who live in the gutter. And so there is hope that maybe from there, you know, a certain counter offensive, so to say, for a lack of a better term, or a certain different movement, not even counter, not directed at anything, a certain movement that has its own logic, you know, may emerge, you know, in the gutter. Now, I do want us to ponder that point a little, because there are two almost similar tendencies, one negative, one positive. One is a genuine gutter being a place where creativity can happen. But there is another one, which is the romanticization of Black people's poverty and the romanticization of, you know, Black squalor. And so you find, you know, even Capital has actually done well, you know, to use that romanticization when it gives, you know, a precedent to its image. It says we all began here. So there is something like, no, it's fine to be in the gutter. Maybe someday, if you work hard or you save with us at this bank, you know, you might be out of, you know, the gutter, as if people for any reason should ever be there, you know. And so there are those two narratives about the gutter. It's romanticization such that we fail to see how unjust it is for people to, in the first place, be made to subsist there. And of course, this other perspective that you seem to share with Mbe, that something genuine, you know, may possibly come out, you know, of the gutter. Now, two more points, and I will, you know, I will long essay that opens the book. Fantastic essay that, you know, is a tour de force for anyone, you know, who here you get introduced to Heidegger, you get introduced to Hegel, to Ralph Ellison. That essay closes with a tribute to those Black South Africans whose work, you know, have made it possible for the kind of work that we're doing today and for the kind of, you know, scholarship that you are engaged in. So you pay tribute, you know, to people who laid the foundation for the Black tradition of thought in South Africa. People like Gcina Mhlophe, Chabani Manganyi, Mapocho More, Archie Mafeche, Bernard Magubane, Mazisi Kunene, Mafika Gwala, Siphose Pamla, Don Matera, Muntu Mieza. Now, why do I mention all of these names? I bet you if you came to the University of Cape Town and accosted Black South African postgrad students, they don't know these writers that you have just listed here. At best, they would be able to tell you of one or two. It tells you of the kind of education that you continue to give to the young generation in South Africa. But it also tells you of how self-serving the argument about the decolonization of knowledge has been amongst Black academics in the universities, because from the names you pay tribute to, it seems to me that 4 years of study in the university would not be enough to take one through what is obviously a Black South African tradition of, you know, or rather a tradition of Black thought in South Africa. Now, amongst those whom you pay tribute to is Muntu Mieza. And I thought that since we're improvising, I would almost end my comments, you know, by drawing attention to what belonging to an intellectual generation means And all of the people that you pay tribute to, some of whose names I've read, are people who were conscious of each other, who were conscious of the work that they were doing. They knew that they shared a historic mission. And so, obviously a BC figure. You also have Mazisi, who was obviously an ANC, a Congress of the Congress tradition. But these were people who knew that they shared a historic mission despite the different, political alignments that they belonged to. As such, Muntu Mieza, who you pay tribute to, was not just an intellectual, but he was also a trumpet player. Now, I call it a trumpet, but in isiZulu it's called makweyana. It's a traditional trumpet. And so we learn from Mazisi Kunene, who penned a poem, in his honor when he died, in the honor of Muntu Mieza. He penned a poem, and in that book where the poem is contained, we learn that actually Muntu Mieza used to be a trumpet player, as I've said, who at death requested that he be buried with his instrument. And so he was buried with his instrument, and, Mazisi Kunene penned the following poem. And I beg your indulgence, I'm going to read just a part, of the poem that Mazisi Kunene penned, for Mieza. It's titled Mieza and his musical instrument. And the musical instrument is makweyana. And it reads, Makweyana spoke to me, I spoke to her, my lover. She stood against the branches of the fig tree. Her eyes sparkled into the night. I hugged her, my lover, to create a dream, to imitate the tales of the snake winds. She sang to me from the shoulder of a mountain. She made me sleep beside the shadow of the stone. She brought me wild fruits for my hunger. We were the twins exiled from the feast. We wandered through the savannah and the tree shades. We sat together at the gatherings and sang our song. There were those who came to listen. There were those who came to see the wound. There were those who came for the dance. Yet others sent their hunting dogs after us. I am hers, she watches over me in my sleep. She sleeps on my left arm. We are the twins nourished by the first light of dawn. Now that's the end. For those, of course, who are skilled in the analysis of poetry, they would find that poem very telling. But I would not, take us away from the book today. But I just thought that in the true spirit of the book that Moalaudi has given to us, we must celebrate those who have come before us, who have been exemplary in remaining true to a tradition of Black thought, in South Africa. So the first essay that opens the book ends with that tribute to all of these, people, or some of whose name I have read. And then from there starts the second section of the book titled Musings from Below. And here, a very interesting, maneuver happens in this section of the book. I say interesting because the second section is mainly short stories and poetry. But if you've read carefully the long essay that opens the book, you'd get a sense that what the long essay does, it was theoretical framing for the short stories and the poems that follow in the second section. So this is not a random jumbling. So if you look from a distance, you think, oh, maybe this is someone who didn't have enough content, wanted, to get a book out, and therefore, drew whatever short stories he may have written and poetry and added an essay. No, there's actually a logic, in this, mix that the book is, which is that the essay, provides a theoretical framing that locates, the short stories and the poetry that follows and the conversations that, follow in the second section. These two sections can be read independently, but they complement, each other such that, the short stories render the more academic essay accessible. As I said, the short stories and the poetry renders the each part of the book accessible. And so I'm going to stop there and ask maybe, that Moalaudi, as he starts his comments, for some reason, I think that I'll be justified in asking him to read to us before he starts his comments, maybe just the first part of a poem he has in the second section of the book, which is titled "We Have a Business." Now, if I had the book, I would have read it. You see, these are the challenges of working online. I'm afraid of tapping into things that will then just, put me out of this. But on page 110 of the book, Moalaudi has a poem titled "We Have a Business." And I would ask him if he could kindly indulge us and begin open his comments by reading us, just the first, half of that poem.
No, thank you, Doc, for opening for us. I mean, it's interesting what you've made us think about in terms of the book. I mean, also looking at the book before Moalaudi, you come in. There's something that I also found interesting. And Doc, you talked about it in the beginning of your talk. The idea that comes to mind when you think of meditations, the obvious deka, but also for me, is the idea of meditations and conversation. It seems like a very tenuous alignment. Something that Moalaudi does in the book is that there's a sense of the killing of the self in writing the book. And of course, this was bound to happen because once you talk about Black people, the idea of the self quickly runs away because all Black people are the same. For me, it's quite interesting in how we think of a meditation, because generally meditation is something that an individual does on their own. They sit down in some place, in some mountain, wherever, and they start to meditate about their lives or the lives around them. But Moalaudi, here, you bring in an interesting twist to it. You have co-travelers who do this meditation with you, which I think is something quite interesting. And also, another question that comes up is the idea, can really meditation take place from the gut? But yeah, those were a few comments that I thought were quite interesting when I looked at the book as well, that Moalaudi you can talk to as you come in. And of course, starting with the poem that Doc asked if you can start with, if you have it there with you. But yeah, over to you right now.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's quite rare for people from the gutter, in particular, to be offered such an opportunity. So let me start with the poem as per the request, and then I will get into other things. Yeah, the poem actually goes as follows. We have a business. It is called the Production of Disruptors Enterprise. Look for the company profile in your community, not on paper or from the revenue collecting authorities. It is registered in the realities of the oppressed, exploited, and dehumanized. You see that young black woman denied sexual and reproductive rights. You see that constantly CV churning generation that fails to secure decent employment. You see that gay and lesbian community that lives in fear. You see that albino community that is fearful of being mercilessly killed upon a mere stroll in the community. You see those young black people who are overworked yet underpaid in call centers, hotels, and restaurants. You see those young people who can't access education, those communities who can't have access to reliable, non-commodified water and electricity supply. Yes, that is how our company profile looks. It is booming. We are looking forward to more customers. After all, the global economy is not merciful. It constantly cancels out the future of many. Those are our customers and shareholders in this enterprise, either by default or by design. As such, the enterprise is promising, particularly in this season of poverty, indebtedness, low pay, depression, anxiety, unemployment, corruption, violence on women and children, ecological destruction, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny. No need to unveil new offers. Material conditions do so. Our motto is simple. We are many. We can change how things are. And so the material basis for the boom of our enterprise are recessions and depression, booms and busts, prosperity in the midst of plenty, fiscal crisis amid hoarded wealth, lack of investment in the context of capital flows, corruption and greed, decadence and self-righteousness, homelessness alongside empty buildings, low pay in the context of soaring company profits and executive pay. The reward or dividends of our enterprise are clear. It's freedom, dignity, and equality. In every endeavor of ours, as the old saying goes, we hope for the best, but we prepare for the worst. So that's how the poem goes about. So it is actually it's an allegorical critique of the establishment. It's an allegorical critique of the establishment in a sense that the implications of the power structure we live in are felt by us, are experienced by us, much as the power structure may want to deny, but its implications are affecting a lot of people. So when we are talking about an enterprise, we are not talking about an enterprise in a conventional sense of a business, but we are talking about a battalion of the oppressed, exploited, and dehumanized, who later, sooner or later, will have to recognize their collective agency, organize themselves so that they reconstitute themselves and their humanity proper. So basically, that is the context of the poem, that as a critique of the power structure. But it has to be in such a way that when someone reads it, they could be able to identify, they could be able to say, these are actually the things that we experience. We are always told of updating our CVs, but we are not employed. If we are employed, we are underpaid. So actually, this enterprise is nothing else but us who are at the receiving end of unequal power relations. So I hope I have made it very clear. So just to also to answer the question around the notion of the gutter, it's a part of what Dr. Lushaba was talking about, that first long writing, was actually to explain the gutter. But in short, the gutter exists in two senses, at least for me. It is both physical and existential. It is physical in a sense that the logic that determines who stays where is the logic of the power structure. And it is the logic that reproduces, or it is the logic that creates a possibility or lack thereof of who stays where and what is it that they can access. Let me make a practical example. People who are living in townships are far away from the workplaces. They will have to use the little money they get from their bosses to take transport to and fro. And that money, they move, the significant portion of it is used on transport. So that is the physical sense of the gutter, that you are far away from the opportunities that the world offers, or from the opportunities that the world could offer. That is the long and short of it. In the US, there is an example of redlining, in a sense that there are people who live in certain spaces. When you take insurance, even in this country, by the way, when you take car insurance, you are checked. There is a notion of dangerous zones. So if you are said to be living in a dangerous zone, you are actually going to be paying higher premiums. And once you purchase that car, once you enter the so-called danger zone, the car tells you there's some voice inside. You are entering a dangerous zone. So this has economic implications on the gutted, because you'll have to pay higher premiums, meaning higher insurance cost and all those things. So it's there in the design of the institution. That is the physical sense of it. The existential sense of it is what I refer to in the book. Your Black people have what I refer to as the ontological mark of Cain. That even if you can evade the gutter as a space and go to another space and go to Senten and go to La Luja and go to any other, a privileged, so-called privileged space, as a Black person, that ontological mark of Cain will always be with you. You can't wash it off. You appear, there is a Black person. Even if you are no longer in Claremont, Nduzuma, Alexander, Mdantsane, in Khayelitsha, as a Black person, wherever you are, you carry that ontological mark of Cain. It's an identifier that governs your relationship with other human beings. And it reminds me of what Fanon spoke about as you actually begin to be an object among objects. That identifier basically locates you outside of that zone of being. And that has far-reaching emotional, psychological, and existential implications. So that is the existential notion of the gutter. So those two dimensions of the gutter have far-reaching implications on Black people. So I don't want us to confuse the notion of the gutter as a replacement of Black people, but rather as the amplifier of the social, economic, and cultural conditions of Black people. That is how we must understand it. So we are not using the notion of the gutter to replace the notions of the working class, to replace the notions of Black. Rather, we are using it as a form of a specific critique of power relations, as the amplifier of the very conditions of the working class, of the very conditions of Black people who embody this ontological mark of Cain, as I referred to. So I won't explain much. We will offer details about access to the book, and people will go through and read and see how we have dealt with it. But I also want to acknowledge the way Dr. Lushaba unpacked the text. The first lines of that long portion of the text, I just want to take, viewers through. It says, in the world that has been made to refuse and violate me, I always wonder, what right do I have to say something? Anything, just a thing. In a world that has been designed to misrecognize me, what possibilities do I have to be heard? My concerns responded to, my needs fulfilled. If I write, who do I write to? How do I know what is right and wrong? How do I know what to do, what to believe, what to challenge, and what to affirm? Or do I fold my damn arms and passively wait for the cold soils in the graves in far-flung cemeteries? Do I resign myself to the violent vagaries of the dominant power structure, of the violent settler colonial capitalist imperialist order? And then I go on to answer the question to say, whatever the answer to these questions, what I know is that to riot, like to riot, is to take a position. This is regardless of whether one is heard or not. Of course, to be heard, even if not agreed with, could make any writing meaningful. But before we could write, we see and experience certain things. When we see, when we have seen, when we experience, when we have experienced, it depends on individuals or community whether it registers such, and if it does, how. So basically here from the start, I'm taking a position. I'm acknowledging the location from where I am writing, that I may write, but given the logic of the power structure, I may not be heard. So first and foremost, you must accept, I did not want to write under the illusion that whatever I'm going to write is going to be some messianic text that assumes that it's going to be privileged in every corner of the world. So I accept the location where I write from the position of the gutter, that there is a possibility that I may not be heard. I may take an effort in writing. I may take effort in reciting poetry in an attempt to rehumanize myself, but there is a possibility that I may not be heard. So you accept the position of where you are writing from, that I'm writing from a point of dislocation. I'm writing from a point of disadvantage. And if I am not heard, it's as a result of the location of where I am. So it is basically taking a position, but also we do not resign ourselves to the logic of the power structure. We say, in as much as we may not be heard, we have to soldier on, stake our claims to being human beings. So posing these questions does not lead me to a sense of defeatism. Instead, these questions become the basis upon which I rebel, so to speak. So I acknowledge my disadvantageous position, but also I use that not to cower in terms of staking my claims as a human being, but rather to use it as an anchor to say, this position I occupy, how can I use it in such a way that I am able to stake my political, cultural, and social claims? So that is the thing. So it's very difficult, because this question actually tells you that they tell you that if you are writing from a position of disadvantage, what language is at your disposal to carry out your message? There you are, you don't have any hope of being heard. You know the notion of black melancholy. You are, you are at 6s and 7s. You don't know what to do, but you want to do something. And I want to link what I'm saying now to say, you don't know what to do, but you want to do something. And that's where the power structure, the idea of the power structure, that it cannot completely crush the human spirit. And that is where hope from the gutter is gotten. That no matter how oppressive, exploitative, dehumanizing the power structure, the idea of Viktor Frankl, that of logotherapy, that in as much as the system can oppress you, can dehumanize you, there is always an element in every human being that it cannot completely crush the human spirit. And that uncrushable element of the human is the one that should be the basis for us to hope and to think and to act ourselves out of any dire situation we may find ourselves in. So the fundamental argument is that, yes, black melancholy, oppression, dehumanization, exploitation, but we must not make a mistake of giving the power structure the very powers that it does not have. It has got its own inbuilt contradictions. And that uncrushable spirit is the one that has to work as a springboard for us to stake our claims, as it were. So that is so by realizing that, then you are not going to fall into a trap of saying, you know, paradoxically speaking, the best way to preserve my life is to take it away, suicide. Ne? So you are taking a position to say, in as much as I'm oppressed, in as much as I'm at the receiving end of these unequal power relations, there is something I can do, because there is that uncrushable element in the human, that spirit that I also want to be. I also want to be in this world. I am not a stepchild. Just like white people have a right to be here, I have a right to be here, and I have to exercise that right in, you know, regardless of the implications. So basically, the other thing which Dr. Lushaba raised, and I think you, Commander Patiwe, is that essay of Mbegezeli Mbele and that claim, the philosophical claim I make about the Gata. We are in no way in any metaphysical flirtation with the Gata. We want the Gata destroyed. So we are not saying, you know, in this Gata, it's fine as it is. We can try and find our way through until, you know, our time to go out of this world comes. No. We are making a specific claim that in the world in which we are not only refused but violated, we can use the very concrete conditions of the Gata, and also it's also part of the claims we're making in the book, that we can make our lives meaningful in the Gata. But that attempt to make life meaningful in the Gata should not be an end in itself, because the Gata is inherently incapable of making it possible for us to live meaningfully. So we acknowledge and realize the concrete realities of the Gata. Attempts by people in the Gata to tend for one another, which, by the way, in another part of the book, that very act of tending for one another, it's a criminal act in a power structure in which, as we put it, we're supposed to die today and tomorrow, constantly die. So any attempt for me to extend an olive branch to you, any attempt for me to say, you don't have salt, I have salt, here it is. So that act of tending for one another in a Gata, in a power structure that says you don't have a right to life, it's a criminal act, because we must be far apart. You must, you know, fend for yourself, I must fend for myself, and wait for our sentence, become disposable bodies that are used anyhow by capitalist firms. If you die, some of your family members are going to be conscripted into the capitalist plantation. They are going to be exploited, they are going to be underpaid. That's how the Gata want us to live. Because the idea of tending for one another, what it does, it actually challenges the logic of us being fungible bodies, of us being disposable bodies used at will by the power structure. So once you tend for one another, you are creating a value system that is antithetical to the power structure. You are one way or the other challenging it, and it can't take it lying down. So the notion of the Gata is both an acknowledgement of this existential despair, but also that out of our conditions, we can be able to organize ourselves and make our lives meaningful. Lastly, on this point, as opposed to what you know, I'm mostly a proponent of what Lewis Gordon refers to shifting the geography of reason. when black bodies encounter this oppression, this exploitation in the real world, it doesn't check whether is this going to make anthropological sense, or is this going to make sociological sense, or is it going to make biological sense. What it does, that is why there's a story in the book of Lydia from Eshowe in KZN. As an individual, Lydia wanted to apply for university. She could not. She went to, she applied for jobs. She got some job at a bakery. Then she had hopes that since I'm working at a bakery, I'm not expected to come with a with a iskaftini, with food. Because I mean, look, we're baking bread, so I mean, food is at our disposal. We are making this food. So only to find that there was a company policy that they are not allowed to eat the very food they produce. And the manager said to her, if you want to eat the very bread you produce, you must wait for your wage at the end of the month to buy this bread, And Lydia is that woman again, who, unable to pay up for basic necessities, goes to Abu Mashonisa. And then Abu Mashonisa took her ID. We will only give you back your ID when you've paid up the outstanding amount you owe us. And then that ID got lost. So I met Lydia when I went to Home Affairs. We had a conversation. And then this one individual is experiencing all these things. So this lived encounter forces us to throw a grenade to these disciplinary boundaries, because you can't categorize Lydia's story as just an economic matter, but also you can't categorize it as just an anthropological matter. You can't. So these lived realities are uncategorizable. So when you start from our lived encounters and experiences, they force us to blast off the disciplinary boundaries. It's not me willing to do so, or it's not anyone, it's not Lindo or Lushaba wanting to do so. It's our realities forcing us to challenge these disciplinary boundaries, where someone who studied economics is not going to, sorry for my French, going to give a damn about someone in urban studies or someone affected by the space allocation. They are not interested. Yet the subject matter is one. It's a human being. So these lived encounters are the one forcing us against our will, by the way. They render these disciplinary boundaries irrelevant, because these multifaceted realities affect us as individuals. So that is so I liked how you unpacked it in terms of this. I don't know whether to call it, academia refers to it as transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Academia came late, by the way, because initially, or at some point, there was this thing that a biologist will do their stuff. A person who did chemistry will do their stuff. But at some point, it was realized that, look, these things cannot work in isolation. Notions of multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity came up. But also academia has not done much in terms of synergizing these things, because you still find people who have studied other disciplines who are going to tell you that, no, I'm only focusing on my profession. I don't give I don't care about any other thing. That is while the power structure uses all what it has. I will make an example of Facebook. Facebook has neurologists. It hires neurologists. It hires IT. It hires people who study our emotions. It has a whole cohort of experts on human mind, psychology, emotions, and everything to tap into us. So the power structure realizes that once you disrupt these boundaries, it will be able to synchronize its logic, it will be able to assert its hegemony. While those who are gutted and, some, petty bourgeois still, ponder on, isolated disciplines without creating or any attempt at creating a constellation of emancipatory ideas. So I blatantly, without any apologies, go against that. So lastly, like you said, Dr. Lushaba, so the long essay, if I were to simplify it, I am actually making philosophical, ideological, and cultural claims. So the second component of Musings from Below, it's a creative storytelling approach that amplifies philosophical claims without employing philosophical concepts. So what we are doing, we are saying, okay, we have these philosophical postulations, we have these philosophical claims, we have all these things, but how are we going to make it easier for someone who does not know English, or for someone who has not stepped in the university? How are we going to take these things to townships, to villages? So we are using this storytelling approach to say, this is how the system manifests, this is how it reproduces itself, and this is its logic. And there is a one short story in the book about, it's a very interesting story. I was telling it to someone else, that it's called Empire in My Hood. In the village in which I grew up at, there was always this language of my lord, my lord, my lord. Anyone who was in charge of either the school, the taxis, buses, was my lord. We were very young, naive, oblivious to the insidiousness of this language. So there was a guy who was in charge of the buses that were passing through my village. This guy was called my lord, my lord. When I was in Lesotho, then, hey, my lord, but it's not even his name, but he's referred to as my lord. Only to find out later that the Lesotho population, institutions, villages, communities have assumed the language of the colony, because Lesotho was under the British protectorate. So we refer to them as the Lord and all those things, like Queen and all those things, because the Lord, because they understood themselves to be the representatives of God on earth. So that language carries, the logic of unequal power relations. So my Lord was actually nothing else but the assumption of that language of the empire. So that language had seeped into our villages, in our bedrooms, in our schools, in our churches. So anyone who was in charge in our village was my lord, and that guy was you couldn't distinguish between him smiling and him expressing his usual, facial appearance, because he was very ugly. But besides that, he was called my lord. So I later realized that this assumption of the language of the empire has seeped into our ways of living day to day. And then if we don't challenge it, like it was not challenged initially, if we don't challenge it now, it will be reproduced across decades and centuries, and it will become so hardened to a point where it's like part of our natural way of doing things. So I think that is the long and short of there's a lot I can say. I just want to give space to people who want to make comments, reflections, and other things. So basically that's it. So short stories are just an amplification of the philosophical claims and the poems. So we are touching on issues of ecology. We are touching on issues of, issues of gender. We are touching on issues of trans and queer bodies, the albino community. So it is a whole lot of things that could not have passed, as we have said, Dr. Lushaba, when you go to I just don't want to mention publishers who said they have a problem, I must change. Instead of talking about the class theory, I must talk about a conflict theory, a watered down. So basically, I must sanitize the language of critique against the status quo. How ironic it would have been, you know. So yeah, thanks, Lindo. Then I will engage more as other things come up. I don't want to take up much space and time. Yeah.
No, thank you, leadership. Thank you for that. We'll take now this time for comments and questions. But no, I just wanted to say thank you, Moalaudi. And you know, you've reminded us of something when you talk about why it is important to theorize from the gut, right? I know there's the debate whether, and I think Dr. Lushaba spoke to it, the idea of romanticizing the township, and also the critique that Mbe has always had for the longest of time, that there is something, right, that is taking place in these spaces. And I also think that you remind us, outside of the actual geographical space of the gutter, to think that we can write outside of the gutter, to think that we can theorize outside of the gutter is nonsensical, right? Because you do tell us that there is a marker. This is Fanon, the old Fanonian adage, that there is a marker in which we go around, that we carry around. So to even think that we can meditate, to even think that we can think outside of the gutter, it's an impossibility, precisely because the gutter itself is not just that geographical space. You can leave Khayelitsha, but you are still part of the gutter. There's a marker in which you carry. So to even think that you can try and escape this locality is something quite problematic in understanding the experiences of Black life. But yeah, thank you for that. Also, I will give it up to people who have questions.
Could I just unfairly privilege myself, you know, by making a comment? And I want to start from the point you are making, that it doesn't make sense, or the insinuation you're making that it's impossible to theorize from the gutter. I think actually it is very possible. It is, you see, that supposition that it's impossible or unthinkable, I think is what has led to the ethical despair that many of us Black, you know, committed intellectuals suffer from when we see Black people crossing over. A possibility of imbibing a consciousness that is reflective of your real condition of existence is possible. I think that's the reality of many academics, Black academics, you know. So there are two different things that I want us to distinguish. It is possible. What is questionable is whether it is an ethically defensible thing to do. Because that when they do is precisely what leads to the contradiction that must exist, that we often avoid amongst Black people themselves. Because in as much as we have this desire to have an ethical relationship amongst ourselves as Black people, there are some who have repudiated that possibility of an ethical relationship amongst Black people. And one way of repudiating that ethical relationship is when people imbibe a bourgeois consciousness. They may be Black, but they imbibe a bourgeois consciousness and, you know, and suggest that they actually exist outside of that gutter. Give you a good example. There's a story actually in the book, you know, it's a short story. Moalaudi would remind me of when, you know, an academic who's crossed over. I think it's a story, Moalaudi, in the book of an academic who's crossed over. It's taken from the American context. I think it's a Black American, two Black Americans conversing. And, you know, it's one Black American who's crossed over talking to one who hasn't crossed over, who, when confronted with the facts and say, well, it's because you haven't grown up, you haven't seen the reality of the world, you know. So the possibility really exists for people, you know, to think they are absolved of the curse, so to say, of being black. And people do act out as though they are, you know, so it's not an impossibility. What I think we should, you know, we should raise is, what is the, you know, implications of that, you know. I don't want to call it a false consciousness, because, you know, it suggests that it has no material. You know, people live, they think they live better, you know, so it's not just a false consciousness. It does have material implications, you know, in people's lives. And, you know, I have a good, bad example. You know, fees must fall. The protest against colonized education in South Africa did not come from academics. For all the decades, they were teaching this colonized education. It took the students to recognize that there was something wrong with this, you know, colonized education. But then suddenly you have the people who actually for decades had been teaching this education, you know, the black academics, turn against the students, you know, to say that, well, your understanding of, you know, colonized education is wrong. But you did not raise any idea of it all this while. Now you're turning against those who see a wrong and say they have a wrong understanding of it. That's precisely what, you know, having that false consciousness, because they were supposing that as academics, you know, they are free from the impact of that colonial education. So in a roundabout way, I'm saying the possibility exists for people to think they exist outside the gutter, and people do, you know, live as though they exist outside of the gutter. But it doesn't mean that, you know, there are no ethical implications that are raised, you know, by that. But the other point that I wanted to amplify is that Moalaodi's book, you know, in the book, he speaks quite, and I'm hoping that he's going to, you know, either respond to this or make a comment. I hope he's still around. In the book, he several times, you know, he writes about, or writes against, let's put it that way, several times over, you write against the bourgeois academic. And quite rightly so, I agree with you. That's why I'm somewhat, you know, wanting to make it your argument so that it doesn't in any way seem like it's my argument against my colleagues. You rail against the bourgeois academic. And in several instances in the book, you show, you know, what is wrong with the bourgeois academic, you know, in a liberal institution who then goes on to produce a liberal student who thinks that, you know, to educate the mind, the market. So we produce the liberal student. Somewhere in the book, you make the point, and I quote, "We write without any guarantees self-conscious academics who imbibes the protocols of academic publishing." You know, you write without those guarantees that, you know, those academics do have. And then again, page 27 of the book, you write, "To invite scholarship, art, literature, science, philosophy, anthropology, etc., as we know them, to grapple with the condition of the black folk, that is, of the reality of living as leg, is to invite them to a festival of chewing water. It is to burden them with the impossibilities or unnecessities." Now, I quite agree with you. You know, there is something wrong with our, you know, education, particularly university education, and those who teach in these institutions, when comfortably they think they've met their responsibility to society, when they produce students, black students especially, who are oblivious of their own condition and the condition of their own people. And then these are people that the institution validate and reward. So what are they rewarding them for? For producing black people who are oblivious of their own existential condition and that of their own people. Now, again, as you make the point, it is not just individual predilections, it's the structure of the disciplines and the language of these disciplines. Now, if this is the reality, I think that the book maybe, hasn't paid sufficient attention. It has emphasized the power structure, especially the capitalist power structure. But I think it has, no, I'm not quite correct, but, I think that there is some reflection that we need about, the knowledge, world in South Africa. How the knowledge enterprise, so to say, in South Africa is structured such that even those who ought to first diagnose the problems of blackness are themselves, complicit to the perpetuation of their own oppression. So you have people who basically ought to be the ones, to diagnose the problems of society, but they are the ones who actually, provide an illusion such that that power structure is able to perpetuate. It's like a victim actually perpetuating a structure that victimizes him or her. And that for the generation, because I suppose we share a generational mission, I suppose for our generation that imposes on us, some very difficult questions about, so where is our hope for a mass conscientization of our people going to come from?
Can I respond to that, Lindo?
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the reflection, Dr. Lushaba. You must come hard. You must not when there's you must come hard. Yeah. So I think it's a very important point. It's a bit unfair for people who are watching because what I'm going to refer to is in the text, it's in the book. But they may jot down once the book is in their possession, they will also take it from there. I want to read something here. So let me start here. Okay. In the situation in which conformity is a rewardable trait, the traitors are then those of us who create and dance to the beats of critical, political, philosophical, cultural, literary, and jurisprudential imaginations. Those who are believed to be on a mission to corrupt well-mannered, immaculate saints in the academy, the state, in the corporate sector and civil society are chucked out. As such, the cultural and epistemic kingdom must chuck them out. It must hunt them down. It must expel them, not only from the academy and its auxiliaries, but from life itself. Their moral claims to knowing and being must be questioned at best and rejected at worst. The ardent proponents of knowledge that are anchored on prejudices and constantly panel-beaten by cliches and categism doggedly see to it that alternative imaginations and radically different ways of life never find expression. Now there is a quote, there is a long quote from the book, Our Sister Killjoy. I think some people may be familiar with it. Nah? I just want to go through that quote and then give it back to you. It says, what is frustrating though in arguing with a nigger who is a moderate is that since the interests he is so busy defending are not even his own, he can regurgitate only what he has learned from his bosses for you, like the need for law and order, the gravest problem facing mankind being hunger, disease, and ignorance, on hijackings as a deliberate attempt to hold decent society to ransom, the sanctity of the UN Charter, the population explosion, the list is endless, nor does anything he has to say have to be a logical response to questions posed. Oh no, the academic pseudo-intellectual version is even more dangerous, who in the face of reality that is more tangible than the massive walls of the slave forts standing along our beaches, still talks of universal truth, underline universal, universal truth, universal art, universal literature, and the cross-national product. So I'm trying to complement what you have said, is that sometimes people you expect to take the bull by its horns are the very people who entrench these unequal power relations, and they are all over. But also I think it's a question of, you know, I just want to quickly link it to the notion of eschatology as I speak about it in the book. You know, there is an eschatological dimension of our existence that fits into that violent temporality that you are given birth to, you grow up, you go to school, you get married, and then that's success, even if you may die or whatever. You know, that linearity. So what happens is that once you enter the academy, there are certain prime things that you mark. Tenure. You want to secure tenure. You don't want to anger the powers that be, and then you squander your long years of study. You've been studying. You know, some people will tell you that I fought for this, you know, and then all of a sudden, Bolindo come and tell you that you must be a revolutionary and all those things. People want to settle for these things. Some are very honest, by the way. They don't claim to embody any revolutionary ideas. They want tenure, they want security of employment, and then the rest, you know, will fall into place. You know, so that is the kind of academics we have. And in the book, people will also see another work referred to as the notion of the endangered academic, a rebel academic as an endangered species. You know, so we are talking about a whole lot of other things. But in short, I'm trying to say, people you expect to unravel the status quo, no, they are not folding their arms. They are actually working, but they are not working for a good cause. They are not working for a revolutionary cause. They just want tenure, security of employment, how many, you know, how many essays or opinion pieces or whatever have been peer reviewed and have been published. That's how it is. So we are faced, and by the way, and because I'm from the gutter, let me say this. There is also a mafioso in the academy that who would you cite? You must not cite so and so in terms of the building of profile and other things, you know. And Lindo, I once said this to you, that my crime with a cohort of young black academics who are now being doctors and professors is that they don't want to unravel the status quo. Instead, they are building a chain, some weird friendship among themselves, which just you know has to see them from day to day. We know some of them. They are very weird friendships. They're sipping wine and sitting closer to whiskey dispensers. So when it comes to when they get an invitation to come to the combat zone, they will tell you that you are not yet a doctor, or you know, or you are someone else who does not understand how the world works, you know. So they water down whatever they grew up with at some point. So basically, that's the kind of cats we have in the academy. But I also don't want to over criticize the academy. I went through the process. I acknowledge that the university offers space for ideas. The only thing we need to contend with is to create ideas, to produce ideas that are going to affirm the self. And this is the self that I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Gata, that in the world in which you are refused a look to the self, not as an end in itself, but as a way to say, how do I affirm the self to sustain the idea or the reality of truly existing in the world? So that's how it is. So, but also the notion of the self is very philosophical. The self is not some atomistic self in a liberal way. The self can only be authentically possible if it goes through the other. So you see yourself through the other self. So it's not a self to direct self. So the notion of Ubuntu, I see you because I am because you are. So it's not a self to self. it's a self through other selves. And the selves I'm talking about are the oppressed selves in the gutter. So yeah, it was a good point and quite a fair critique of what still awaits us, and that's what we still need to work on, Dr. Lushaba. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, leadership. I'm opening it up to people in the space. Any questions or comments?
Thank you very much for the session. All right. I think my point as a scholar within an institution that we regard as the Ivory Towers, I am very much interested in the complex of the Black academic and how then we as students relate to these academics. I must first by saying that the Black academics as a cohort, there are lots of conflict. And so I think that, or rather categorizing them as a dilemma of the endangered species is one that is accurate. But I think I must start with a comment that Dr. Lushaba said. He said, if I quote correctly, the mass conscientization somewhat lies with the academia. And I think I am one to argue against this, that I do not believe that mass conscientization rather lies within academia because of my various experiences interacting, particularly with Black academics in the season fall era and on a day-to-day basis. So I think that more so Black academics, now I'm speaking within the context of these endangered species, they only see us from the gutter as a means, and I might be echoing what our guest already said. They only see us as a means or look at us only from a lens of a specimen, to only enrich their own careers, to only enrich their own theses, to only enrich their academic careers without any form of trying to engage or change the status quo of those who live in the gutter. And my problem with this, and if I make a very simple example of how we are subjected to the specimen by these academics, is we have things like what you call evaluations, right? So we have multiple evaluations, multiple questionnaires on issues such as transformation, on issues on the curricula. And what these schools are only doing, they're only continuously subjecting us to be under the specimen. We only underlooked as this pathological being without any genuine act. If I may use this as an example, they actually change the status quo. And so they we get in a cycle whereby even us who identify as from the gutter, we become tired of being continuously under the specimen or the gaze of these endangered species, which are the Black academics. And that makes it also very difficult to forge any unity amongst Black students and academics in particular. So I think I'll harbor on that point. And when I do have a chance to read the book, I'll be able to engage further on that matter. And perhaps then I would like to invite Dr. Lushaba to sort of break down, is there or could there be any genuine relationship between Black academia in these liberal institutions with those who are from the gutter? And what does it mean when we have, for example, our FMF comrades who then, I don't know if it's knowingly or unknowingly, then also become enroached or get roped in within the cycle and very soon forget that they too are from the gutter and only see revolutionary acts by just subjecting us as specimens. So I think that's my comment for now.
No, thank you so much for that, Esihle. Doc, you want to go in first because I see you were mentioned specifically in the comment.
Sorry, I struggled a bit, you know, to hear very well, you know, but I think I did get the gist of the question, which is why hope that the universities are going to be the space for such, you know, mass conscientization, and also, you know, how the people who get into the academy, you know, then do kind of work that has no linkage with the Gata, or how they then relate with the Gata. So let's start by saying that universities in many other places are not just institutions of work or institutions that are meant to prepare, as I said, minds for the market. Universities have a social responsibility or a societal responsibility. Now, I think there is something that the liberal discourse has, you know, occluded or has done well to confuse us about. When we say education is a social good, it means that your education as a student is not just your right, or it's not just something that is good for you. It's a collective good. When you have become educated, it is not just you who benefits, it's not just me who benefits, it's the whole of society that benefits. How? Because when you are educated, you ought to know how to be not just unto yourself and into the world, but you also ought to know how to be unto others that you share the world with. Now, there is something odd with an education system or someone who says they've gone to the university, but you encounter them in the world, you know, for instance, throwing papers all over, or, you know, littering the world with bottles of alcohol, but you say you have been to school. Now, it must mean that it's an education that does not impact on character. My point is that education is not a right, a liberal right. It's a social good. When we educate you, it is not just for your individual benefit. It's for the benefit of society. And so universities do have that responsibility of conscientizing people. Universities do not just dispense a commodity that people come to pay for, and then you get your commodity out the store, like you go to Pick n Pay, buy bread and out the door. And so Pick n Pay doesn't care what you do with that bread. You might as well get out the door and toss it away. That's not how education is. You know, it's a social good, which then means that the university has a responsibility to ensure that when it has given you that education, indeed it serves the kind of purpose it ought to serve in society. So it is in that sense that I think the universities have a responsibility to conscientize. Maybe it's the word conscientize that seems, it is just to prepare you to live harmoniously with other human beings. Universities have to prepare people to live harmoniously with other human beings. It means that you have to live harmoniously with other human beings by being sensitive and sensible to the fact that they are as human as you are. So you cannot like something for yourselves, but when it happens to others, it means nothing. If you do not like suffering, but you see it happening to other people and you keep quiet, but you say, well, you don't like it, it's not good, then it means your education has not helped. Because, you know, the professional academics that, Edward Said talks about, he has a very good example. He says, you have someone who teaches inequality in the university. And so they speak from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. about the nature of inequality. But on their way home, once they've left the classroom, on their way home, they don't recognize inequality. In fact, they don't recognize that actually they themselves are perpetuating, that kind of inequality. The academics, the Black academics who work in the academy, I think that Esihle has a concept of the Black, of Black people or Black intellectuals in the academy that I don't share. Where do they come from? They come from the gutter. I mean, to be Black Moalaudi puts it well. You have that ontological mark of Cain. So it's not an escapable position. You may choose to. I mean, I'm not going back on my position. You may elect to, it's very possible. You may elect to pretend, to live in an illusion, in an illusionary state that it doesn't affect you, but it doesn't end at an illusionary state. It has material effects, because when people have denied their blackness, the white establishment pays them handsomely. So it has material effects. But the point is that they do not have to learn what the gutter is like Esihle is suggesting that, shouldn't they have a different relationship with those of us who come from the gutter? We come from the same place. Our originary place is the same as Black people. We might then along the way decide, to imbibe a consciousness that suggests we are not, but there is no distinction, the Black academics and then the gutter, such that they have to learn how to relate properly to those who come from the gutter. But I think that the other part, of course, about Black academics is well answered in the book, by Moalaudi. So I would let him, speak, more about it, because I think that, somewhere on page 85 in the book, he talks about, bourgeois academics. He has a critique, of these bourgeois academics. So yeah, I would end it there.
Thanks, Doc. Moalaudi, you wanna come in?
Yeah, no, I think Dr. Lushaba has just in that point made before, the comment he made now, we dealt with the question of Black academics and other things. More will be gotten in the text. I don't want to labor much on that, but I just want to, if when we go closer to the end, just to read a small story. It's very short towards the end, just that opportunity, because I think it would be important for me to read it out as my parting shot. You'll tell me.
Debza asks, meditations from the reference point of the gutter or blackness, what are the implications for this? So let me read it again. Meditations from the reference point of the gutter or blackness, what are the implications for this?
Yeah, so like I said, the notion of the gutter in no way seeks to replace or to supplant the notion of blackness, or when you come to your Marxist paradigm of analysis, the notion of the working class. The notion of the gutter seeks to grapple with the specific nature of the power structure. It doesn't replace, supplant Black, it doesn't supplant working class. No, it doesn't. It rather amplifies the conditions that are faced by the working class, the conditions that are faced by Black people. So it shouldn't be a question of the gutter or Black, the gutter or working class. No, it shouldn't be understood in that way. And that point is actually made more clearly in the book somewhere, that this is how the notion of the gutter, we use the notion of the gutter as a specific way of grappling with specific power relations, so that we hammer the point home and make the entire thing very simple. So we are in no way, jumping into the bandwagon of the constant production of miscellaneous words, of catchphrases and other things. No, not at all.
Oh no, thanks. The other question is from Tiliza Tulasizwe. Tiliza writes that as the writing of the book reflects philosophical approach, but without necessarily employing philosophical concepts, my question is that since it is written in a manner that is easy for almost everyone to read and understand, then what are the strategies to make the book available to my granny there at Kwanongoma? access not being a privilege mainly to those who are against the ideas of the book, because I believe it should not be just the book that published and shelved, but it should be an instrument used in the program of conscientizing people from the gut.
Yeah, I think simple on that. The idea of storytelling, the idea of using stories to convey a message, it's a long-standing tradition in our Black communities, and it makes things easier because you link, you are able to explore the relationship between human beings and other human beings, but also you are able to explore the relationship between human beings and the natural environment. So what we are doing, the very device, the literary device of storytelling makes it way easier for anyone who is not, who cannot speak English, who, to relate to the message that you are talking about. And the story also that I am going to read towards the end will confirm what I'm saying. So the idea of stories, short stories, was exactly that, to make it accessible to, a person who went out of school at grade 1 and all those things. So I think that is the whole idea behind the short stories. Thanks.
If those who are interested in getting the book, you will see on the chat room, there's an email that's out there. You can email book orders at webmail.co.za. Book orders at webmail.co.za to order a copy of the book. The book costs $320 plus 80 Rand for delivery. It will be available soon in bookstores, but those are yet to be confirmed as to which ones, but it will be available soon to bookstores. But for now, you can send an email to book orders at webmail.co.za for $320. Yeah, so thank you from everyone. That's parting shot, Moalaudi. You can go.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. Thanks, Lindo. Thanks, Dr. Lushaba, and thanks to the School of Extramural Activities. The unforgiving gods of food parcels, soup kitchens, and feeding schemes. Mamlambo was cursed by the gods of food parcels, soup kitchens, and feeding schemes. She died. She was a servant of the people. She was the servant of the servants of the people, loyal to the cause, lax in demands, livid against the injustices of the world. Yet every time Mamlambo joined the line to the soup kitchen, a daily cut-off would end exactly at the person before her, and food parcels hovered above her head to everyone around her. Neither was she in the payroll of any local school feeding scheme. The curse of the gods of food parcels, soup kitchens, and feeding schemes had struck. It had struck hard and uncompromisingly so. She had won a name in the battlefield of political work as a door-to-door mastermind, soft-spoken yet persuasive. She had won many hearts for her party. It was known that if she put her symbolical duke, every household would be reached, preaching the gospel of hope for a better life, as the manifesto of that particular party says. So was her trademark speak. Yet Mamlambo died. She died holding the manifesto of her party that promised a better life for all in her hands. The food parcels, soup kitchens, and feeding schemes that gave everybody a lifeline refused her a chance to see many more days, to be, to live. Yes, to be and to live. So that many, yes, to be, or yes, to be and to live. So he died clutching the manifesto of her party in her hands, that many believed it was only her hope. In her house, it was her dead body, the manifesto, the symbolical duke, that the picture maniac brigade managed to capture, or perhaps chose to capture. Mamlambo did not die of coronavirus, cancer, or common cold. She died of the curse of the gods of food parcels, soup kitchens, and feeding schemes. Those who were privy to more information say her intestines had begun eating themselves. But Mamlambo also died because of the utter silence of the spectators, us who wielded phones to take pictures and videos, and to archive the maladies of the world without any agency and imagination to intervene, to challenge the neo-colonial wrecking crew. It is the damn us who marvel at the spectacle of the torture of the masses of our people, the tortures of the masses of our people by leadership. Us who constantly sheepishly seek blessings from the very gods of food parcels, that such cases manifest and fulfill their diabolic intentions. It is us who naively see sadism and submission to power as salvation from despair and hopelessness. It is us who don't have a problem with our miseries edited and our agonies packaged and repackaged by modern algorithms to be sold in the film industries of the world. Mam Lambo is dead. Mam Lambo died with the manifesto of a party in her hands. Mam Lambo died. She died of the curse of gods of food parcels and soup kitchens. The intestines had begun eating themselves. Mam Lambo is no more. Mam Lambo is gone, and gone for good. But she is everywhere, here, there, and all over. Mam Lambo is dead. Long live Mam Lambo, long live. Thanks.
No, thank you so much, Leah. Beautiful. Once again, thank you to you, Comrade Moalaudi. Thank you to Dr. Lushaba for a beautiful conversation and quite an insightful one.
Thank you very much. Thank you, I truly appreciate.
Thank you so very much.